The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 2. Completed. Many scholars who have studied the facts. The main consider that everything that happened was a coincidence. I can consider myself one of them. He disagreed. Everything that happened was a consequence of that all the chips were at the time in the adequate situation. It was not the result of chance. Except from the book, The Eternal War. Author, Pentella Blent. Nothing could be done. In 2 weeks he would leave his post. Now he had to take care of Liana and the rest of the patients. As soon as she left the tower, the young woman was met with a great uproar. The tower had a wide esplanade as a square that was full. The crowd crowded around Matani, his son, and 2 strangers. This surprised the young woman. If Matani had not deceived her, Phidias had left for a trip this morning. It was quite rare that they returned already with help. Arian asked a neighbor, and apparently the expedition had found help much earlier than anticipated. The young woman managed to break through and reach almost the center of the tumult and thus hear Phidias talk about his mission. The truth is that for once we have been lucky. It was just leaving the town and taking the road that leads to the hills of the south when we met these 2 magicians who were passing through these lands. As we have been told, they are on their way to the ruins of the north to study them, but when we told them about our problems, they have offered to help us. People were quite excited about the news of the wizards' help against the plague. Everyone was hopeful and relieved with this good news. Arian then saw the 2 wizards talking to Matani and the rest of the council. The commotion that was beginning to form was enormous and more people arrived. Matani chose to go with the magicians and the council inside the tower. People also intended to enter with them inside, but those intentions were avoided by Phidias and the rest of the young people. There was shoving, screaming, the occasional punch. Everyone wanted to meet the saviors of the plague. The situation was increasingly tense until Matani himself had to throw a good shout to calm the spirits and stop the fight attempt. Someone very clever brought a stool where Matani could climb and use it as a platform. Then he called everyone to order. He spent a good time shouting, but when he made sure that both those who were inside the tower and those who were outside trying to enter and those who prevented the entrance had their attention on him, he began to speak with the authority of being the person with more power of Caesarea. Dear neighbors, it seems that we have been lucky for once, but before announcing concrete measures or firm decisions, we have to meet the members of the council with the newcomers, and once all the issues have been clarified, we summon you here in the late afternoon for an assembly. There all your doubts will be clarified. I invite those of you who are not sick to take care of your tasks, and to the convalescents I recommend that you rest to regain strength. Good day to all. Having said that, Matani got inside the great tower and closed the doors, with Phidias and other young men standing guard to prevent anyone from sneaking inside the tower. The public was disappointed, but Matani's words were quite coherent, so the vast majority heeded his recommendations. Arian certainly decided to go see Liana after attending to some more or less serious case. Liana was already quite recovered. Although she had to stay in bed, she ate with the girls some fish soup that the young woman had cooked the day before. Fish was the main source of food and wealth of Caesarea. Much of the economy depended on the trade of salted and smoked fish with the south or nomads from the interior. This is how the Matani had made their fortune. Those who exchanged fish to the nomads for skins and other raw materials that they then resold to the great southern kingdom called Bir. From this kingdom the Matani obtained spices, cloths, and other manufactured products that they sold to the inhabitants of Caesarea and to the nomads. For this intermediation Matani was increasingly a richer man, although lately he had problems. The king of Bir for more than 2 years had prohibited maritime trade with the kingdom of Bir, so Matani had to pass through Xeres, a city of the interior. It was a move by the king to control trade with the free lands of the north. Caesarea was an independent population, like many of the small towns on the northern shore of the Sea of Eternity. It owed no obedience to any kingdom or empire. And they had rarely had armed altercations, nor did the pirates bother them. To the south was the kingdom of Beer, and to the north the magical elven kingdom of Bersari. Despite the proximity of the elves, they were rarely seen by Caesarea, except in the few cases in which their magnificent ships were sighted sailing the sea at high speed, or some daring fisherman who went far enough north to see the gates of the wonderful kingdom of the elves, but did not go further since a mysterious current quickly expelled him to the south. Arian had never seen an elf. The closest he came to seeing them was once, in the company of Loaf and Nilam in the course of a summer excursion through the mountains of the interior. They reached the gates of the kingdom of the elves. Arian could only see a large forest of large oaks. Loaf then told him wonders that the elves did not need stones to build a fortress, but that the trees themselves were the wall, and that what she was seeing was not a forest but the defense that protected the kingdom of Bersari, and it was not convenient to advance further. So between the kingdom of Beer and the kingdom of the elves were the free lands of the north, but it was not always so. The elders said that long ago everything belonged to a great kingdom, and Caesarea was a great city in those times. But that kingdom disappeared, lost all its splendor. Of course, there were remnants of that glorious past, such as the great tower that was now the seat of the council. And those ruins inside next to a hillside, where Loaf had found the jewel he had given to Nilam. But much further inside were other, more interesting and dangerous ruins. They called them the Towers of Oblivion. Many stories and legends of that place were told. It was frequent that many magicians went in to search for knowledge. Surely the two strangers were heading towards the towers. Arian reflected that all this rambling was due to the fish in the soup and realized that noon had already passed. If he did not hurry, he would miss the assembly called by Matani. He ordered Liana to lie down again and then headed towards the main square where the village tower was located. Almost the entire population was found inside the tower, only those who were so weak that they could not stand, but the feverish patients who had strength had approached there. Arian responded to the numerous greetings from the people. They did not reproach him for anything about his work, most simply believed that the intervention of someone with more experience was necessary. Inside at the long table were almost all the members of the council, unlike in the morning meeting, which was a sign of the importance of the meeting. Arian sat on the floor, as was the custom in the assemblies since there were no chairs for everyone, so it was normal to bring a blanket used to avoid the cold floor. Now that he had time, he noticed the two outsiders who were coming to save Caesarea from the plague. Both were talking to Matani. The first of the outsiders seemed the oldest, appeared to be 40 years old, and his main characteristic was the height, since he far exceeded 190 in height. Another remarkable feature is that he was totally bald, and the only facial hair he had were fine grey eyebrows and a very careful goatee that adorned his chin. However, his companion was quite short, much younger, and of robust build. He looked more like a hired thug than a magician. He sported a dark, long and wavy hair. Both had dark complexions, which indicated that they had been in the south for a relatively short time. They were serious and expectant before the large congregation of people. On the contrary, Matani was exultant, greeting the crowd. Once they made sure that almost all of Caesarea was in the room, Matani invited the rest of the council to sit down, as he did with the two guests. Once the council was seated, Diores began to speak, commanding people to keep silent. Silence! Silence! Called to order. Please, the extraordinary session of the Council of Caesarea will begin. Please be silent, so that we can listen to the President of the Council, our dear neighbor Matani Mayasa. The first time Diores said that he was not paid much attention, but the third attempt, accompanied by some great blows with a thick oak cane on the table, there was silence in the room. Matani showed his support for the action of Diores by making a gesture with his right hand demanding a little silence and attention. When the ambient sound was low enough and most of those present were already focused on Matani, and once the silence was done, Matani began to speak. The first time Dioruz spoke he was not paid much attention, but the third attempt, accompanied by some great blows with a thick oak cane on the table, there was silence in the room. Matani showed his support for the action of Dioruz by making a gesture with his right hand demanding a little silence and attention. When the ambient sound was low enough and most of those present were already focused on Matani. Then, once there was silence, Matani began to speak. Dear neighbors, only those of us who are quite old like me know the threat that is to our beautiful village, this plague that we are suffering, but with an aggravating fact, as most of you already know, and that is the fact that Loaf is not here with us, since he has not returned from his last trip, and that the weight of this burden falls all on our young neighbor Arian. Matani pointed his finger at her, which caused people to put their eyes on her, which blushed at the young woman who lowered her head. Although their work is excellent, it is not enough, since as we know this plague makes relapses more serious than the first time the disease is contracted. Many of the village's longest-lived applauded when Matani finished with this part of the speech. Arian had heard of the Great Plague that had occurred more than 40 years ago. Before the plague, Caesarea was a thriving population of more than 5,000 inhabitants after barely exceeding 500,000. That is why Caesarea in the eyes of a visitor was a huge population, but many of the houses on the periphery were in ruins, especially those that were located on the coast. The survivors decided to live in the center of Caesarea. Barely some families lived in the hills outside Caesarea. As soon as that plague only remained, apart from the ruins, the so-called Hill of Memories, a large mass grave where almost all those affected were buried and where there was a stone monolith dedicated to the goddess Thani begging for mercy. Matani asked the highest outsider to stand at his side. The people stood silently waiting for the words of the council president. As I knew the seriousness of the threat that was presented to us and seeing that the situation did not improve, I organized an expedition formed by a group of volunteers formed by some of the most promising young people of our beloved Caesarea. Their mission was to seek help from the populations of the south, and so they left in secret, before dawn. But then the gods heard our pleas, and by chance they met this magician who is here next to me. His name is Selan Demir, and his partner Dariso Gilla, who is sitting next to us. Both come from the city of Tripulia where, as many of you know, our neighbor Nilam is located. You must know that these two wizards belong to the Great Order of White Robes. They have told me that they will help us eradicate the plague, since in the south they have suffered it for many years, but they have overcome it and know an effective remedy against the plague. When Matani announced this, the people gave applause and cheers to the magicians and Matani. The president of the council was satisfied by the ovation, then indicated silence again with a gesture of his right hand. I have also been told that your order intends to have a permanent headquarters in the north, since many of its members go deeper and deeper into this area because there are a series of ruins very interesting to them, and our population is suitable to house it. Not only its magicians but also clerics and priests, which would mean that we would not be alone again in case of an emergency like this. The audience again applauded this unexpected news about a delegation of magicians in Caesarea. Matani and the magicians sat in their places. Again it was Dioruz's turn to speak, indicating that this was the end of the assembly and that everyone should leave the council room. With a bit of disappointment, the audience left the place to go back to their own business. Arian began to leave the room, but Dioruz quickly went to where she was and told her amicably not to leave the room since the council wanted her to meet with them again. Since it was the desire of the two magicians to ask him some things about the symptoms of the plague and the treatment he was administering to those affected. Arian then remained in the room until it was empty and Dioruz closed the door. There was only her, the wizards, and the council members. The young woman approached them. Now she could observe the wizards more closely. Selan talked animatedly with Matani over a beer. He was tall and thin with a neat appearance that indicated he belonged to a high social class. The other wizard looked more unkempt and his nervous gaze was focused on Arian, which made her uncomfortable. Once the council members made sure their guests were taken care of in terms of food and drink, they disappeared from the room, leaving the three experts alone. That surprised the young lady, who didn't expect to deal with them directly. They were left alone. It seemed that neither wanted to start the conversation. Selen ate some bread. The other wizard continued to watch Arian, who remained defensive. There was something about the wizards that he did not like. When Selen seemed satiated, he fixed his attention on Arian, gave him a friendly smile and with a gesture invited the young woman to sit next to him. Arian accepted suspiciously and sat down, while the other magician took a seat in front of him while still looking at her. "Forgive our manners, my name is Selen Demir and my partner is called Doris Ogilla." Both magicians bowed their heads slightly in a topical greeting from the southern travelers. "Delighted, my name is Arian and I'm from here, Caesarea." The wizards didn't speak for an instant and again it was Selen who spoke. "Are you the one who has taken care of these people during the plague outbreak?" "Yes, sir, for more than a month, but most of the sick are mild, although there are relapses and they get much worse." "Oh, yes. We already know this terrible plague. In my country we call her the eternal mother-in-law, since once she arrives she seems to leave but never finishes leaving home." Saying this, he could not help but let out a smile. "That is, the disease is caught and cured. Within a week the symptoms appear again, but much more seriously and progressively, again and again until the patient dies from exhaustion." Selen was calm and seemed to know the disease very well and how to treat it. "I hope not to be inconsiderate, but in my opinion it does not seem anything serious. Instead of a plague it seems something like an intoxication, since most people appeared with symptoms at the same time and there was no time for contagion as usually happens in pestilent diseases." Saying this, the two wizards frowned and exchanged a glance with each other without saying anything to the young girl. Selen remained silent and for a moment seemed to hesitate, but her tone of voice was firm. "It is a plague, trust us. What happens is that it is very contagious and the first symptoms are very mild. Surely you are infected but have not yet manifested virulently." Selen accompanied his words with a conciliatory smile, but Arian was not convinced by the magician's explanations and could not hide on his face an expression of suspicion at his words. "What is your teacher's name?" asked authoritatively the other magician, Doris, who had not opened his mouth in the whole conversation. Now I was asking him about a totally different topic than the one they were talking about. "Loaf," replied Arian, surprised. "How long ago did you leave Caesarea?" "For months ago, I think. He went south to settle some issues." "What issues?" Doris' attitude was quite aggressive, while Selen seemed amused by her partner's questioning of the young woman. "I don't know, he just left," Arian answered without leaving his surprise. "Did you know where it came from? Do you know what he was doing here? Do you know something? Or you were just a silly goofy student who laughed thank you?" Arian was afraid. Doris was beside himself and had stood up while saying those words with a threatening air. "Ha ha, ha ha." A laugh from Selen sounded at the scene. "Calm, Doris. What does she know about her teacher? Surely nothing. You already know Loaf. She knows how to look for life very well and say only what suits her." Selim took Doris to the door, inviting him out of the room. "Don't worry, I'll talk to her. I'm sure that when she knows the truth she will attend to reasons. Go for a walk." Selen dismissed Doris by patting him on the back in a conciliatory manner. The young girl and the wizard were left alone. Selen came to Arian's side and spoke to him with a conciliatory tone. "What character, excuse us, are nervous. Loaf deceived us long ago in another matter that does not concern now to deal. Doris and I intend to find it to clarify some aspects that at that time remained unfinished." "Did you know Loaf?" Arian was surprised. Selen sat back on the chair and smiled slightly at the young lady's surprised face. Yes, we know each other. Loaf also belonged to the Order of the White Robes. We both traveled the entire coast of the Eternal Sea, both eastern and western, in search of adventure and knowledge. We were much younger than your master, but we were like brothers, until one day Loaf deceived us and left us lying around. He abandoned the order and disappeared. Finding his trail here has been pure coincidence. Our trip was to conduct a study for our order, and the last thing we expected is to find the place where Loaf hid all these years. You talk about Loaf as if he were a criminal. What did he do? Arian did not believe that Loaf was capable of doing evil acts. Nothing calm, that is not concerning our current goal, which is to cure the plague that threatens the inhabitants of this place. It's a thing of the past, but both I and Doris would appreciate it if you could tell us something about Loaf's activities here at Caesarea. Selin was kindness in person. Nothing at all, I don't know anything, I promise you. Here he only did routine tasks, nothing more. I almost never saw him exercise magic. Arian tried to be as convincing as possible, but Selin couldn't hide her disappointment with a subtle gesture of rage on her face, but remained silent. When he seemed to regain control and relax, he spoke again. Good, because you want it. But I think it is better that you tell us what you know. Although he trusted that over time you will change your mind, you can leave and we will call you when we need your services. They said goodbye in a cold and speechless manner. Arian left for his little house in the hills. Along the way he couldn't help but see the distant silhouette of someone who followed him with his gaze at a great distance. It was a hooded man wearing a white robe. Arian couldn't help but imagine Doris staring furiously at her from afar. He came home, picked up some clean clothes, and returned to little Liana to see her condition and stay with her for the night. The little girl was almost fully recovered from the disease, but still felt a little weak. Arian insisted that she stay in bed. The next morning Arian woke up abruptly. They were knocking on the door of the house, screaming and calling the little girl to open the door. He heard, "A miracle," they exclaimed a lot. "They have cured us," they told him from the outside. The girl couldn't resist the insistence of the people outside, and opened the door before Arian had time to react. They entered the house, more than a dozen neighbors, all of them the previous day. Arian had found them convalescing from the plague in a more or less serious way. Now they showed an unbeatable appearance and a vital and cheerful attitude. Liana approached the group. An elderly woman offered the little girl a small glass bottle containing a green liquid. The girl looked suspiciously at the contents of the container, but all the neighbors encouraged her to drink the contents. As soon as Liana drank, the concoction took effect immediately. The color of her face recovered its pink tone, leaving the pallor of the past. Seeing the recovery, everyone returned to cheer and speak wonders about the potion that the magicians had prepared as soon as dawn, and that they had distributed house by house. And that the magicians said was an effective remedy against the plague, and by the results it was something certain. Arian had to recognize that Liana was fully recovered from the disease. Like many of the newly healed, they were invited to go out to celebrate that the plague had finally subsided. Arian could not refuse and accompanied Liana on her journey through the streets of Caesarea. Everyone was happy and content, and the weather was good as the day was splendid again, and even towards a fairly pleasant temperature. Their walk took them to the main square, where Arian could see Matani talking to Selin. The two were sitting on one of the benches that surrounded the water fountain that was in the main square. He also observed that both maintained a serious expression. The couple stopped talking when they noticed the presence of the young woman. The trio exchanged glances, but only Matani showed a worried gesture. Although he remained silent, the two men got up and went to one of the small taverns that were in the square. Arian diverted his attention to some girls who demanded his attention. In the afternoon, when Arian, after eating and was about to go with Liana to pick some roots in one of the nearby mountains, appeared a boy, one of Matani's nephews, who gave him a written note in Matani's handwriting. "Arian, please come as soon as possible to the tower. We have worrying news about Loaf. Greetings. Matani." As soon as he finished reading the note, he went to the seat of the council, while he could not imagine what could have happened to Loaf. When she entered the tower, she did not expect to find the entire council sitting waiting for her, and Selen sitting next to Mertani. The magician was sitting in the place that Loaf used to occupy in the meetings. Arian began to suspect about what the real intentions of this meeting were, and even more so when Darius was not present in the room. Mertani invited the young woman to sit in a chair placed right in front of the council. Arian took a seat calmly, showed great calm, without losing Mertani's gaze. It was an interrogation without a doubt, and Loaf would be the central subject. Selen was calm and fiddled with his fingers, totally indifferent to the young woman, as if this situation was not with him when it was clear that he was the main instigator. Mertani took the floor, got up from his seat to give himself more importance. Council members, we must first be grateful and thank Selen and Darius for having delivered us so efficiently from the terrible plague that loomed over our beloved Caesarea. At the end of these words, the rest of the members of the council applauded, but Mertani appeased them with a gesture with both hands to stop, once there was continuous silence with his dissertation. However, these magicians have not only saved us from the plague but also think they know the reason why this plague has fallen on us. At this affirmation among the members of the council, only murmurs were heard and all showed gestures of surprise. Mertani ignored. Unfortunately, who can give us a clue about his origin refuses to collaborate with our distinguished guests, but does so without knowledge, since he does not know that who has been his teacher has actually been deceiving us all these years of residence as our dearest neighbor. More surprise among all, but the most surprised was Arian. Certainly did not expect Mertani's statement about his former advisor, but Mertani continued to speak, ignoring all the commotion caused. She does not know, hopefully, that her master was a renegade of the White Robes. He was expelled from the order because he sought knowledge in rituals forbidden by the Great Magic Council. But not only that, long ago Loaf deceived these two great magicians in the course of a trip, stealing a magical object, and that surely brought it here, to our town, hiding it. This object can be the cause of our misfortunes, since that object is cursed and brings evil to the place where it is, unless proper protection spells are performed. The new revelation caused the murmurs to turn into shouts of surprise. The bustle and indignation were very great among the members of the council. Arian, although Mertani's statements took her totally by surprise, did not lose her composure and maintained a serene and calm gesture. Mertani began to use an authoritarian tone and expressly addressed Arian. That is why the magicians have asked us to communicate this advice to our dear neighbor Arian to help them in their task by answering all their questions as a thank you for their great help with the plague. There was a silence in the ward. Everyone's eyes fell on the young girl again. Selen, without saying a word, stood up and walked towards Arian with long determined steps. I keep silent for a few minutes. I wait for the audience to be impatient to speak. Thank you very much, Mertani. Well, I will not mention here the betrayal of Loaf to our order that was the reason for his expulsion. I want to point out that we did know that Loaf was in this locality. I have to admit that although our main mission was to investigate the Towers of Oblivion, but we also had other reasons, and they were to find clues from Loaf to settle old accounts. Although it was something secondary, the main thing was to visit the ruins. But it was our destination until we met his expedition for help. The audience is stunned listening to narrate the reasons for his trip. The magician paused and then continued his exposition. We knew for sure that Loaf was here, since Nilam, your neighbor, had commented that he was his master when he requested his entry into one of the magic orders of Tripulia. As Loaf is on the list of outlaws of the Great Council of Magic, we were made aware of this clue. We talked to Nilam and except that he had a rudimentary and basic knowledge of magic, we did not get anything clear except that he was in Caesarea. Nilam, being an apprentice of another magic order, is free from our jurisdiction and only the Great Council can investigate him. But having no hard evidence on him, the Council cleared him of charges. Seeing Nilam's innocence, our order that he had already planned a trip to the north, he sent us to clarify this matter at once. Once the reason for his trip was exposed, the magician approached Arian to begin his interrogation. Do you know anything about the subject? Loaf told you something of his secret. None that I know of. The young woman answered calmly, under the watchful eye of the council and especially Murtani. Nothing. Didn't he do anything strange in the almost 20 years he stayed in this place? Selin insisted again. No, I only have words of thanks for Loaf. He took care of us and taught me everything I know. This feeling of gratitude was shared by many of the board members who also regarded Loaf as a dear friend. But I do not teach you enough. Your skills against the plague have been totally ineffective. I think it is because your powers are limited and you cannot fight this kind of evil. If you say so. Arian despised the wizard. Indeed, I affirm, it was not a natural plague, dear student. This plague was due to a curse, but not only the plague. I have taken the trouble to find out, thanks to the collaboration of Murtani and other members of the council, that since Loaf disappeared there have been a series of misfortunes that have not ceased to torment the town and its inhabitants. Something that you obviously had not noticed. Yes, but I think it's more of a coincidence than something Loaf can be blamed for. Well, I wouldn't be so sure. In fact, I can say that Loaf was expelled from our order because he found something evil that corrupts and only brings misfortune. This object must be treated properly because otherwise its consequences for those who possess it are dire, and we believe that this object is still here. The council was concerned about Selin's claims. No one liked having a cursed magic item in their population. Arian was surprised again by the wizard's claims. I'm surprised by what you're saying, Selin, replied Arian. I'm sorry to contradict you. If Loaf stole that object and it cost him to be an outlaw, why abandon it now? It seems that it is an object that he has mastered, because if for 20 years that object has not caused him or us any problems, and knowing that if he abandons it he would begin to cause a malignant effect to all his friends, and that his effects would attract attention. The logical thing would be to take it with him than to leave it here. Arian's argument was quite sensible, and a majority of council members showed their approval at his words. Selin realized that he was losing the support of the council. The wizard was nervous, his words showed some anger. I don't care why. To me it is evident that the object is still here, and to save us problems my companion Darice and some men sent by the council have gone to search your house, where Loaf also lived. Selin could not hide a smile of victory then. The interrogation had been a ploy to get her away from her house so that she could search her quietly. This ruse devised by Selin as well as Murtani outraged her in such a way that she jumped up and stared into Selin's eyes, spoke with a serious tone. Then if you excuse me I will go to my house to see what these men do. Selin and Murtani kept the gesture serious at the young woman's resolution, but she did not wait for Murtani's permission to leave the room. Everyone present remained silent, impressed by the young woman's determination. Murtani then closed the council meeting. The members of the council slowly left the room, but only 2 men resisted leaving, or rather waited for everyone else to disappear to talk quietly. Those 2 men were Selin and Murtani. She doesn't seem to know anything, Selin. Murtani said frankly, as he had a great appreciation for Arian. That seems, dear friend. Let's hope Darice finds the object in his log. That the gods are propitious, but I believe that there is a place where that object can be easily hidden. Where? There is to the north near here, on the outskirts, are ruins of a castle that are a little hidden. There Loaf spent whole seasons meditating, searching. If somewhere he hid the jewel it should be in that place. Perhaps, then my partner and I should go and have a look tonight just in case he is hiding there. I recommend it. Do you want someone to accompany you? No thanks, it's better that we finish this topic without help. Arian returned to his house, He found no one inside it, but the traces of the presence of unwanted guests were quite evident. Since everything was messy and scrambled. The closets wide open with all the clothes lying on the floor, all the drawers and the huge chest, which was one of the few things Arian had as a souvenir of his parents. All his belongings were lying on the floor. Even all the paintings that she had bought from some artist who ventured from time to time through Caesarea were torn. They had looked for something inside the canvas. Your favorite books totally destroyed with torn pages. The pillows of the whole house were torn to pieces. He carefully observed his lying on the floor. It had accompanied him all his life for as long as he could remember. Now it lay shattered on the floor. This scene caused him pain, but not physical. It was a more bitter and deep feeling. Seeing his whole house destroyed had made a very deep wound in his soul, in that area where wounds take time to heal and never heal completely. I saw them, Arian. It was Liana who was standing by the door. I came to look for you for a walk, and some men from the village arrived with one of the magicians. They went inside the house and started throwing everything away. Arian walked over and hugged the little girl. You know, the way my house is. It seems to me that you are going to have to let me sleep in yours. Of course, if Arian, so you will tell me some of the stories you know. I'll tell you all the stories you want. It was already getting dark and there was no news of Matani, the council or the magicians. She assumed that for the moment they would leave her alone, and in Liana's house she was safer. The two were talking while watching the stars come out of the window that was facing north. They could observe the road whose destination was the great mountains where it was lost among lush forests and eternal snows. They perceived to their surprise how two shadows advanced along the road under the dim light of a lantern. Look, Arian, aren't they wizards? Said the little girl, pointing with her finger to that point that was moving in the distance. Arian fixed his eyes to where the girl pointed and frowned. It's a very rare thing. That road is not the one that goes to the temple, commented the girl with innocence. Temple? How do you know the ruins are of a temple? Liana was surprised by Arian's reaction. The girl was not unaware that the information she knew was quite relevant to the young lady. Some time ago my mother and I used to go around that area to pick mushrooms. They grow well under the shade of those stones. One day we found Loaf seemed very concentrated looking at some of the rocks, although worn they showed some drawings. I walked over and asked him what he was doing. Loaf smiled at me and asked me what I knew about the place. I replied what my mother had told me, but it was a great castle of which now only the tower of the council remains. Loaf started laughing at me. He told me that all the people of Caesarea were wrong. They were not the ruins of a castle. The place was a temple, dedicated to a powerful god, but now no longer existed. He gave me a honey candy and disappeared among the rocks. Arian stared at Liana, then put on his worn boots and a thick cloak to protect himself from the cold. Liana was shocked at Arian's reaction to her words. Where are you going? I'm going to see what magicians do. Quiet, tomorrow I'll be by your side. Arian, I think it's the last time I'll see you for a long time. The girl's tone was saddened. Me too, Liana, I have that impression. Me too. When she finished speaking, Arian gave the little girl a delicate kiss on the forehead. Then he stroked her soft blonde hair with his hand, while whispering a lullaby in her ear, until the little girl fell totally asleep, leaving her in bed. So the young woman left the girl's house and went quietly to the ruins. She knew the way by heart by the countless times they went to that place in search of medicinal plants that grew among the ruins. Only in the dim light of the white moon could she easily follow the path. The blue moon was much more timid. After an hour of walking he reached the height of the ruins. He was at the bottom of a small valley of the mountains that guarded Caesarea to the north. The ruins suggested that there must have been a huge construction in that place. Despite being a fairly protected area with a mild climate in any season, fertile land, but nobody dared to live here. It was believed that the place was cursed. Only Loaf along with his two protégés and some daring inhabitants of Caesarea frequented the area since they were very good at some mushrooms very appreciated culinarily, and also plants and flowers with medicinal properties. It was not difficult for him to observe the fire since the two magicians had made a bonfire, under the shelter of a huge granite rock, with which to warm themselves during the cold night while laughing a little and chatting animatedly. He hid among the bushes that grew on the hillside. There he could observe them safely, and thanks to the acoustics of the valley also hear them perfectly. They were relaxed and shared a bottle. We were definitely right, this is the place. The downside is that idiot from Loaf has gone ahead of us again. That voice resembled Selen's, but with a slightly more cheerful tone, no doubt the result of the liquid they drank. You are right, the symbols leave no room for doubt, and nobody from this miserable little village knows anything. That bastard escaped with the jewel. Doris's voice had a relaxed tone without that rage he showed when talking to Arian. The two wizards were relaxed. They could speak frankly since no one could hear them. Then Selen sat up from where he was sitting and took a fairly full bag that he had hidden inside a backpack and showed it to his companion. With a serious gesture he spoke with a lower tone of voice. Yes, but let's finish our plan first. Remove the mantissa leaves before anyone discovers us. Doris shook his head with an affirmative gesture, and he too was about to grab something from his stool bag, but his gesture of tranquility changed to another of surprise. He became nervous and searched through the backpack and his robe, compulsively palpating nervously. Troll shit, I have forgotten the scrolls of Nortal in the village. Without them I cannot translate the symbols of the main rock. Selen, however, remained calm and drank some from the bottle. Okay, calm down, go back to Caesarea, and while I'll stay burning this. Arian could watch as Doris hurriedly returned to Caesarea while Selen was left alone. The magician lay down again in front of the bonfire, threw the bag into the fire and watched as the bag was consumed in the flames, while taking a few sips from the bottle, placidly tasting each drink. Arian decided to approach little by little to see what exactly the magicians burned. But he wanted the bad luck that, being aware of what Selen was doing, he did not pay adequate attention where he stepped. He supported his right foot badly and slipped on a rock full of moss, causing him to fall downhill. The noise of the fall immediately alerted Selen, who sat up alarmed. Arian was on his knees recovering from the fall. When he raised his head, his gaze met the figure of Selen, watching her intently. Their gazes met. The wizard moved with great agility and reached the height of Arian. He picked up the young woman but did not let go and began to shake her hard. What are you doing here, girl? Arian was paralyzed. She didn't know what to answer the wizard, as she assumed that her visit to this place was something that Selen did not like. I know that the flower of mantissa, boiled and diluted, is very toxic, produces fevers, cough, dizziness. Symptoms very similar to that of the plague. Surely, and I do not know how you polluted the water. Not even the most expert doctor or healer would think that the cause is the extracts of that plant. It was all a deception of yours. Selen was surprised, but Arian too had not been nervous as in the interrogation, and with just a few sentences had put the magician in check. The magician let go. On his face there was a gesture of admiration towards the young woman. He gave a small smile. Brilliant, Loaf taught you well, too well. You are the greatest talent I have seen in years. You possess a talent in the healing arts such that we had to increase the dose of mantissa to cause a serious epidemic. Unfortunately, this caused some of the weakest to die. Arian looked at Selen with hatred, remembered the death of Liena's mother. You are despicable. What are you looking for? Surely you already know, a simple jewel, like a pearl. It emits a small bluish glow just like Zoran, the blue moon. I've never seen it. Selen's face hardened. Lie. I know. I can read your mind, you are surprised, girl. It is not a small bluff. I have cast a spell that allows me to read your thoughts. It is dangerous to invoke it when there are many people around. You can go crazy, but here we are alone, you and me. Arian thought the magician was lying, but maybe what he said was true. Now I understand everything. Loaf did not leave the jewel here. It was too dangerous. Sooner or later he knew we would come looking for it. Neither does he have it since he is too old to have something so valuable. Your brother Nilam has it. Arian broke down. Now everything was lost. No. He doesn't have it. Loaf gave it to the nomads of the free lands. The wizard separated from Arian and started laughing. Loaf is very cunning. He has put the jewel right in front of our very noses, and we as fools have sought it all over the world. How could we think that such a mediocre apprentice had in his possession such a powerful object? It is a plan that is not his own, but great without a doubt. What are you going to do to Nilam? Once discovered, the game of Loaf will be simple. Tomorrow we will leave at dawn to Tripulia. We will find your brother. We will accuse him of necromancy. So the council will not stick its nose in our affairs. Once arrested, he will give us the jewel and will be executed. Later we will see to it that Loaf also receives his punishment. Never. Sorry, you can't do anything. Right now you're going to die. Selen closed her eyes, began to recite unintelligible words that Arian could not understand, was casting a spell towards her. In a few seconds the wizard would throw a ball of fire or a ray of hell that would reduce her to ashes. Arian had to do something. He was guided by his instinct. With great speed he picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the head of the magician with all his strength. Selen didn't expect Arian's attack. He had confided. He received the impact of the stone on his temple. The magician fell to the ground violently, and his head hit a rock. Arian was surprised by the effectiveness of his improvised attack, approached where Selen lay, examined the wizard. The second blow was deadly. As an expert, it did not take long to confirm Selen's death. He was in a mess, looking for something to justify his action. There were only a few ashes left of the sack that contained the leaves of Mantissa, his only proof of the conspiracy. No one would believe her. Everyone would think that she had killed Selen to protect Loaf. The council would condemn her to death, or they would hand her over to the white robes. He had to act quickly, as well as he could hide the corpse in some bushes at the bottom of a ravine. He hurriedly covered the blood stains with dirt and put out the fire. This would gain time. Hopefully Doris would not discover the corpse until the next morning, and until the afternoon they would not notice its absence. One day ahead, he ran to his house that was not far from the ruins, and among the disorder that reigned inside, Arian managed to gather everything he thought indispensable to make a long trip. His brother was in danger. He had to travel to Crulilia to warn him of the danger in which he was for having the jewel. His secret was safe with Selen's death. It was a plan. There was no time to doubt. If she stayed, the most sure thing is that everything would end, since they would never believe her. If Loaf gave the jewel to Nilam, it would be for some reason, so he had to help his brother. She could not go straight to Tame. She would be easy prey for her pursuers. He decided to go north. Hopefully he knew a little about the terrain. He had already reached the gates of the Elf Kingdom. Then he would have to go west and reach the lands of the nomads of the steppes. There he could travel south to Tame, camouflaged between them. Evidently there were dangers: wolves, bears, trolls, bandits. They also said that the elves could bewitch you and make you sleep a century, the weather, hunger, snow. But all that was better than staying and being at the mercy of white robes. She sighed and determined began to walk, followed the path that Loaf had taught her, and that was none of the main ones. It was the one they used to reach the kingdom of the elves. An abandoned road that connected Caesarea with Bursary. He reached a hill. From there the road went into the forests of the north. He turned for a moment. The dawn began. From there he could see Caesarea beautiful. Doris must still be looking for Selen with luck. She observed the port where the boats awaited the fishermen. The great council tower dominating the entire population seemed to be bidding her farewell. I get to see the house of little Liana. What would become of her now? She would be safe. I could not take her with her. If there was anything in Caesarea, they were good people. Then he looked at his house, on the outskirts, next to the West Road. He had been so happy. He couldn't wait. He turned around with his face full of tears and started walking. The horizon was dark. The sun's rays had not reached the forest. As soon as she entered the interior, she found herself much more animated and confident. She had lifted a weight off her shoulders. Now she was responsible only for her fate. She did not have to content Matani or resign herself to being a simple apprentice. He was now free even though he was aware that his life was in danger. But he didn't really care. He could finally see the world and reunite with his brother, which was what he wanted most.